Welcome to the Crimson Engine. My name is 𝙍𝙬𝙄𝙎. Today we are talking variable ND filters, and I have Lee's new element filters to check out. So as you may be aware, the R5C shipped last month as a cinema camera without internal ND, and a lot of people were caught off by this, especially since the C70, which I'm filming this on, does have internal ND, but internal ND isn't perfect, and on-lens ND is actually a better solution for some applications, which we'll check out. There are actually four types of ND on cameras. The ones in the camera, like the C500 Mark II, C300 Mark III, and the C70. There are ND lens converters, so you can get a R to EF lens converter that has a variable ND inside it. There is the 4x5 ND plates and variable ND matte boxes that either go on 15mm rails or attach to the front of the lens. And finally, there are these guys that screw onto the front of the lens and give you variable ND with the twist of the adapter. The disadvantage of the in-camera ND is you get all or nothing. You either get 0 stops or 2 stops, 4 stops, 6 stops, 8 stops. So you can't use the ND to dial in your exposure. The lens converter ND is good, but if you want to go between 0 and 2, you'll need to take off the lens and the adapter and bring a second adapter, all the while exposing the sensor of the camera to the elements. So it's less than ideal if you're in the field, if you're in weather. It can be difficult to put on and off, especially if you have other stuff on the camera. The matte box ND, where you have two different polarizers and you can circle through, works really well and adapts to any size lens, but it adds size and bulk to the camera, which isn't always ideal. It makes the camera a lot more conspicuous if you're shooting in public, or you have to carry that extra size and weight of a matte box if you don't need it for other things. The big advantage of these guys is that they're small, they're light, you can carry them with very little disadvantage and use them if you need to. You don't need to set the camera up in advance for ND. Another advantage the elements have is that they have the amount of filter on the side of the lens. So you can dial it into 2 stops or 3 stops or 4 stops and use that as part of your calculation for your exposure if you're using a light meter or you're purposely under or overexposing us by a certain amount of stops. Most ND filters, you just have to go by eye. Why do you want to use ND in the first place? Well, you can't modify the settings of the camera. If you're in a bright area with lots of light, like say outside when it's sunny, and you want to still get very shallow depth of field, you want that cinematic look of just your subject in focus and the foreground and the background blurry, you will need to use ND because you can't change the shutter angle without changing the amount of motion blur. You can't change the ISO without changing the dynamic range of the camera. And you can't change the T-stop, f-stop without changing that depth of field. So ND is incredibly useful to maintain a cinematic shallow depth of field while shooting in bright environments. So the Lee elements come in a 2 to 5 stop, 2 being the minimum, 5 being the maximum, and a 6 to 9 stop variable ND. Which one should you use? Well, if you're using interiors with the light coming in from outside, you'll probably want the 2 to 5 stop. If you're outside in direct harsh sunlight and you still want to shoot at T1.5 or T2, you'll probably need the 6 to 9 stop. Of the two of them, the 2 to 5 is far more versatile. You can use it in conjunction with, say, lowering your ISO or changing your shutter speed to just get another little extra stop. So the 2 to 5 is going to come in handier in far more scenarios, but the only way to get that T1.5, T2 in direct sunlight is the 6 to 9. One issue that most filmmakers, myself included, encountered with earlier variable ND lens filters was color problems. In the early versions or the sort of off-brand versions of these filters, as you would change the ND, you would get a green or a yellow color cast. Sometimes purple would creep in. You would get vignetting and fringing. The edges of your image would start to get distorted, and it created all sorts of problems in post and color correction, especially if you were changing ND amounts within the scene, and so different shots needed to be matched to one another. The fact that Lee is doing a variable ND filter means that they have overcome those problems now. They are the industry standard for lens filtration, and these filters are incredibly clean and incredibly color accurate, probably as much or more so than the NDs in the cameras themselves. One thing to be aware of is that once you put your ND filter on the front of the lens cap will no longer fit. So if you need to cover the lens between takes or cover the lens going from location to location, you need to either remove the filter and put it back in its little clamshell and then put the lens cap on, or get one of those neoprene rubber, universal lens caps that can cover the filter and the lens. In front of lens filters actually do a pretty good job of protecting the front element of your lens. If you're doing action or you're doing anything where water or dust or dirt is getting splashed to the lens, these are a great first line of defense because it means that you may scratch a $250 filter or get it dirty rather than a $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 lens that might need the front element replaced, which is much more expensive. When I'm looking at film or camera accessories, I'm always aware of what is the downside to having this and bringing it with me on set. With a matte box and the quite delicate 4x5 filters, it is sort of an extra bag that you have to bring. But with variable ND, it's something that you can just tuck into your camera case or your lens case, and there's almost no added weight or downsides to bringing it on a shoot, and it can literally save the shot. There's my look at the Lee Elements variable ND system. You can see the links in the description. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.